What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to my channel. In this video, I'll be going over what is caching. Just like usual, the article for this video will be in the comment section. If you guys want to go step by step and read through it with more detail, you can find that in the comment section. So this is another entry into the system design videos that I've been making, and this is an important concept, especially when you want to speed up your application when data is coming through. So let's learn about what is caching. What is a cache? Well, to keep it simple, a cache is a high-speed data storage layer which stores data for easy and faster accessibility. This will allow for faster access to data compared to running a query. So say for instance you have a backend system and you need the user's profile. Do you really want to run that same query 10 times if the user asks for that same query 10 times? No, it's probably better to store that somewhere, and when the user asks for it, you can just retrieve it right away instead of running that query multiple times. So what the cache does is, instead of running the query multiple times and receiving the data from the main data storage, the cache allows you to reuse frequently used data by storing it in an efficient manner. So how does caching work? Well, data that is cached is usually stored on a separate data storage layer, often on a fast access hardware such as a random access memory, which is RAM for short. Like I said, it's separate from the main data storage area, so that can be your database running somewhere on a server. It's something completely separate. It's on a different hardware layer, and it's usually a random access memory, or RAM for short. So usually the RAM works together with a software component, and the size of the RAM is relatively smaller than the main component that's usually storing everything else, right? So it's smaller, but it is faster and it's easier to access. Now the trade-off is capacity for speed. So not everything should be on the cache, it just should be things that are frequently used. So there are different types of caching. We have in-memory caching, which caches the data directly into the RAM, which is usually faster than storing where the original data is placed. We have database caching, which each database usually uses internally, and generally is used to avoid querying a database excessively. So if a database sees that you're using the same query multiple times, internally it may already have cached that same query, and if it sees that the data is the same, then it will just return what was returned previously because it already cached it internally. Then there is the CDN caching, which you guys probably use and don't even know, which is the Content Delivery Network, or CDN for short, and it is used to store content, so things such as web pages, style sheets, scripts, and media files in a proxy server. So when you're using applications like Facebook and Instagram and asking for data, usually that information is stored on a CDN, because maybe you might be across somewhere across the world, and instead of trying to get that data from the origin server, it may try to get it from a cache that is closer to where you live. So we'll go over that in a couple of seconds or a couple of minutes, but these are some of the different types of caching that is used a lot. So like I said, there is in-memory caching. Like I said, in-memory caching is cached directly in the RAM, which is usually faster than storing the data where it was originally placed. Usually this type of caching is based on a key value database. So as you can see, there is a table right here on the screen. It's showing the key, which in this case I'm putting it as a user ID, and the value is simply the data associated to that user ID. So in this case, I have information regarding the user, so that can be the age and the name. And usually the key is represented by a unique value, so you know that if it's a user ID, to specify a user is unique, you give it a unique value, and that value is cache data. So in this case, it's the user profile. So by specifying the key value database will return the stored value. So in this case, if the person is asking for Bobby, they'll send the user ID of 3, and then I get all the information associated to Bobby. If they're asking for Joe, I send the user ID of 24, and I get everything associated to Joe. So this solution is pretty fast and it's easy to understand. This is why it's usually preferred approach by developers, and it's often used with popular services such as Redis and Memcached. Then there is database caching. Each database, like I said, usually have an internal cache and is generally used to avoid querying the database excessively. So by caching previous queries, the database can provide the data pretty quickly or even immediately. So for a period of time, the desired cache data is valid within the cache, and it can avoid making excessive executions of the same type of queries. So once the data is invalidated, or maybe someone made an update to the database and that value within the cache is not the same, then you can erase that information from the cache, but then you can use, or you can update it with the new data that was stored in the database in the cache, so the next time the user asks for it, that information is sent back to the user. So the process is the user will send a request, and if it's not in the cache, right, it'll go to the database, it'll run the query, and then it'll send a response from the database. Now if they send a second request and it sees that the value is in the cache, then it will send a response from the cache back to the client. So that makes it way faster, because now you don't have to go back to the database, you don't have to run the query again. You can just stay at this step and go back to the client with the response. So that's some speed right there. Then there is CDN caching. CDN means Content Delivery Network, and is aimed at caching content, like I said, web pages, style sheets, scripts, media files in proxy servers. So essentially it's like a middleman between the user and the origin server storing its resources. So when a user requires a resource, a server intercepts it. So when a user requires a resource, a server intercepts the request and checks to see if it has a copy of the resources that the user is asking for. If it does, then the resource is sent back to the user, and if not, then we have no choice but to go back to the origin server. So these servers are usually placed in different locations worldwide, and user requests are routed to the nearest one. So I talked about load balancers in a previous video, and I'll leave a link somewhere, but that routing can be done using a load balancer that is geo dispersed. So based on a user's location, then it knows to route that request to a specific CDN, and if the CDN sees that the data is not there, then we can go back to the original server or the origin server. So using this example, you can see that without the CDN, right, there is no middleman, right? We had to go back to the origin server, and that may take some time. We have to run the query, and we have to get all the information that the user needs, and then it'll go back. That might take 3 seconds, right? That or longer, right? Depending on how big the data is. But with the CDN, we see that there's caches, or there's cache servers distributed all over the world, right? So if you're in, say for instance, you're in the United States, or actually let me just use a different one. Let's say you're in Canada, right? And you're asking for information, then you'll probably get data using a cache server that's in the United States. But if, for instance, that cache server doesn't have the information that you need, then it may go back to the origin server and then place that information on the cache server and then go back to the end user. So next time the user asks for that information, it'll be like 1 second. It'll be quick because the cache server is pretty close to where the user is, and we didn't have to go back to the origin server, which is in Africa or something, or somewhere far away, compared to where the user is in Canada. So these are things that when you start making a bigger application and you know that a lot of users are using it, especially globally, a CDN can be useful to cache your information, because we don't want the user to wait many seconds for information that they could have already had right away. And then there is client caching. This is the extra one because you guys probably use it every day and you don't even know about it. So usually client caching is a part of the browser. Sometimes it's called web browser caching. And the first time a browser loads a web page, it stores the resources, or the page resources, such as like text, image, style sheet, scripts, and media files. Pretty much anything that is needed to run the website, it's stored right locally. And the next time the same page hit, the browser can look into the cache for the resources that were previously cached on the user's machine, right? This is generally way faster than retrieving it from the server. So a lot of your bigger applications use it. So say for instance you were to use Facebook, right? Sometimes you may not even have access, right? But somehow your Facebook page is able to load even when you don't even have internet access, because a lot of that information is cached already on your device. So that is how that logic is done, right? You have the initial request that is being done. So like you send the first request, you check, okay, is this in the cache? Or it's probably not in the cache, but this is the first request. So I'll go back to the database, and then I'll cache that information, and then I'll send that back to the client. So now that the information is cached, when the user send a request, maybe the second or third time, when they send a request, I can just go directly to the cache. That information is already there, and then that cache can automatically send a response back to the client, and it's really fast, right? I don't have to go back to the database and make all the proper queries or go through the server to get all those files, all those video. It could be videos, a big video, right? So all that's already cached. I can go back and send a response, and now the website is running right away. So these are different types of caching methods that are used, and I want to give more real world examples because I think it's better to understand it if I use real world examples. So hopefully that was easy to digest, but hopefully when you guys build your own project, you find a way to implement a cache, because I feel like a cache is really easy to use. Like I said, even if it's as simple as getting a user's profile that is frequently asked for, or even something as paying attention to how often a user logs in, or even with authorization, I know that a cache can be used. So that'll be a project for you. Figure out how you can implement a cache in your application that you're working on, and go from there. Leave it down in the comment section. I'm very curious to see how you will be able to implement that into your application. So thank you guys for watching. Hopefully that made sense. If you enjoyed it, go ahead and leave a like, subscribe, and yeah, more videos like this are coming. I'm really enjoying this system design review, and I hope you guys are learning a lot. Thank you.